Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Nova Holistic Podcast. My name is Dijana from Dijana.org, and today we are here for episode 15, and I am introducing a beautiful lady that has a lot of amazing things to share with us. Her name is Kate Hudson Hall. Welcome, Kate. How are you, my darling? Hello.
Oh, hello. Thank you so
Hi.
much, Deanna, for allowing me to join the podcast and chat with you. It's very exciting to be here.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And of course, you've had me on your podcast as well, which will air soon at some point. I've forgotten the date.
So have I.
Okay. It's a bit like that, isn't it?
I haven't got the dates yes, it'll
Yeah.
be this month in February.
Yes, and it's only really the beginning of January, so that we are recording this, and this will air later on in February. So I'm really excited about that. So let's go ahead and have a little chat about you and your work and your journey in life and how you came to be the beautiful lady that you are today. Would you please start introduce yourself to us a little bit?
Yeah, lovely. So I am a psychotherapist and I practice many other different therapies. I practice hypnotherapy, emotional freedom technique, which is the tapping technique for
Mhm.
people that don't know. And I also practice NLP, neuro linguistic programming, which we love.
Cool. Yeah.
And I'm a Reiki master and other different therapies as well. And I've been doing this for the past over 20 years. And I am also an author. I've written a number of different books. My two main books. The first one was called Bulimia Sucks, which is helping people with the eating disorder bulimia. And within that book, there's 25% is my memoir because I had bulimia for 15 years when I was younger. And the rest of it is sort of self-help for people to begin to break their difficult bulimic behaviors. And then I have a workbook that goes with that and a food journal. And then recently, just a couple of months ago, I came out with my new book, which is for help for people with anxiety. And that is called Anxiety Hacks. So I'm just about to work on making the audiobook for that, which will be interesting, which is always a challenge. And I also have a podcast. I have two podcasts. The first podcast is for people with eating disorders called Bulimia Sucks. And then the second podcast is for people with anxiety called Anxiety Hacks. The Bulimia Sucks has been going for 2 years now. And we've had over 32,000 downloads. So that's really good.
Wow.
It's just fantastic to be able to know that people are downloading it, listening to it, and hopefully, helping, getting some sort of support and help and hearing the fact that they're not on their own because it's such a debilitating disease. And I also, yes, so I had bulimia from when I was the age of 18 for 15 years. Very
Wow.
severely. So that was obviously a very difficult time. But I was sexually abused when I was 9, and I do believe that had something to, it was a strain of the reason why I developed bulimia, because I had no guidance. Obviously, I was told not to tell anyone, and so I didn't. And I didn't actually talk about those experiences when I was sexually abused when I was 9 until I was in my 30s and going through therapy. So I'd held on to that deep, dark secret for a very long time. And then I was again sexually abused when I was 17. And so I think, combination of all sorts of things sort of sent me down that path of being totally out of control with my emotions and my feelings. And it came in, with bulimia. So it was
Mm-hmm.
a very dark time for me.
Mm-hmm. I don't, in my own practice, I don't tend to work too often with people with eating disorders specifically, but I have had a handful over the time that I've been in private practice. And I will say that I consider my one client that had bulimia one of the hardest journeys in therapy as the therapist. I found that difficult. Not that it's about me, but it's just sort of the journey of supporting someone.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, I mean, I don't know whether people that haven't had the exposure themselves or seen someone suffering with bulimia quite understand.
Yes, and that's the problem.
Um,
People it doesn't make sense to the conscious mind. Somebody with bulimia, it doesn't make sense to the conscious mind why you would binge and purge. You know, what
mm,
on earth? And so for people that don't have it, it's just something that really makes no sense whatsoever.
mm,
But it's all about feelings and the thoughts and feelings, the drivers, and it's beginning to unwrap that and work with those difficult behaviors. And very slowly, the recovery can be a slow, long path, but
mm.
people get over it. I no longer have any of those sort of behaviors and haven't done for the last 15 plus years, 25 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Never
Congratulations to
once crosses my mind if I'm, frustrated or angry or whatever it is for me to, go and overeat and make myself sick.
mm,
And it just goes to show how powerful the mind is and how we can grow those neural pathways in our brains that we no longer use the old pathway. We focus, we automatically go down that new pathway of, dealing with your feelings, your emotions differently.
mm. Okay.
Mm.
There is so much that I want to ask you about. Just for the sake of full transparency for the audience, I intentionally don't know a lot about your story because I want to experience it organically as we're talking.
Yeah.
So that we unfold sort of this story, in that more genuine way. I'm I'm not very good with ooh ah with pretending, so I prefer to do this. To talk to you, and I have a lot of questions about um, your journey. And if you don't mind, do you mind if we rewind a little bit and sort of go back to,
Yeah, no,
you know,
absolutely.
the 9-year-old or even,
Yeah.
the younger Kate, and just I'm curious about the circumstances in your environment, that surrounded you as a child.
Yeah, so I think, so when I was doing my father died, and so my
Oh,
mother brought me and my 2 older brothers up. And my older brother, he was so close with my father, but when he died, when my father died, my brother didn't actually speak till he was 8. He didn't speak to anybody for a whole year. He wouldn't even speak to my mother, friends at school, no one. And how
mm,
traumatic. And he, obviously never, this was, in the 1800s. It was a long time ago. He didn't get any help for that. And he suffered with that all his life. He's never reached out for help. And he has problems. Um, and So yes, so he passed away, and from the age of 5, I now know that I had separation anxiety from my mother because she was like a mother and a father wrapped in one. And I really struggled with that because I would, I'd sit there crying apparently when I was 2 and pat her on the back and try and take care of her from that young age. And so that was sort of I felt that was my role throughout. So being separated from her, I found really difficult. And then the with the abuse, my next door neighbors, it was 2 brothers and a daughter, which were all our ages. And the daughter I was very good friends with, and I would go over and she would come over and, play together. And I was over at her house one day, and her older brother, who was 18, would have been taking care of us because there was no parents around, and he was always very horrible to us. And he then invited us into his bedroom to listen to some music. We were like, oh, this is fantastic. So we finished playing with our dollies and then went wandering into his bedroom. And then he told us to perform oral sex on him while the other person sat in that chair and had to watch while he molested us at the same time. And, we had to take it in turns. And then we would go afterwards, he'd send us on our way and we'd go back and play with our dollies and never talk about it. And that happened, I remember at least 3 times. And, and he said to us, you mustn't tell anyone because this, that, and the other will happen. And so we didn't. And we didn't talk about it together either. And it wasn't until, like I say, I was in my 30s that I was going through therapy and I was away with this particular friend of mine. And I brought it up. And I said to her, do you remember what your brother did to us? And I've never seen anybody look so shocked in all my life. And I was trying to have her open up and talk about it. She wouldn't talk about it. And I said, well, it's affected me all my life. And she said, well, it's never affected me. No, I can't believe you're talking about it. Why do we need to talk about it? And she was in total denial, which is fine. That's her. That's her pattern of dealing with it. And so yes, so I never told my mother or anyone. So all that time, just held on to that deep dark secret. And then when I was 11, I was sent away to boarding school, which was another difficulty. And the separation from my mother, and I would cry every night into my pillow, and that would go on for 5 weeks until I saw my mother for one day either side of half term, and then it would bring up all the feelings again, and then I would go fall back into that pattern again, and it was really difficult for me. Yes, so that was all very difficult. And then when I was 17, I went out with there was a chap that I liked, and I went out with my stepbrother, and we went to this party, and I didn't know anyone, and they bought a bottle of brandy to drink, and I didn't drink at the time, but I was trying to be cool, and so I was drinking this brandy, and I remember standing in the kitchen of this party, and then the next thing I remember was waking up on a bed with 3 men there raping me. And then I passed out again. And then I came around again, and then they were still there taking in turns. And then I eventually woke up at 5 o'clock and managed to stagger my way home in great agony. And then I never told anybody about that either because I was so ashamed. I thought it was all my fault. And then when I was 18, I developed bulimia, funnily enough. I had to find a way. I had no idea about what feelings were, how to deal with them, no idea whatsoever. So my way of being able to cope with these difficulties was to binge and purge, and then that just gradually got worse and worse and worse. And I look back at
So,
the pictures of me when I was, in my early 20s, and one of the symptoms is to have a very moon face shape, but be very, very skinny. And these pictures of me, I'm hardly recognizable at that time. And a
mm,
friend of mine, she said to me at that time, she said, why is it that whenever us girls are sitting around chatting about, whatever, you're the one that never ever talks about your feelings? And I had no idea what she was talking about. I didn't know what a feeling was. My way of coping was to binge and purge, you know, 5+ times a day.
wow.
Mm.
Mm, that's first of all, let me say I'm really grateful and humbled that you shared this story with us. Thank you. And
Absolutely.
secondly, I'm sorry that you experienced such, I mean, what seems like such hardship.
Mm. But at the time, you just sort of struggle your way through it, don't you? And you do as best you can.
Yes.
And then for me, when my mother obviously tried to approach me a couple of times to get help for me with the bulimia, and I was like, no, what are you talking about? I'm not doing that. And then eventually she managed to drag me to the doctor. And then from then on, I remember sitting with the doctor actually, and he said to me, he said, so, well, why do you make yourself sick? Why don't you just stop making yourself sick? And I was, I didn't answer because I thought if I knew the answer, then I would, I would do it. Which, it was a long time ago, so the doctors weren't so educated as they are now. And then he sent me to see a psychiatrist, which in those days, because remember this was in the 1800s, it was a long time ago, um, was a huge deal, and only people that went to see a psychiatrist in those days were people that were very severely mentally disturbed, and I, I was very distressed about that. Anyway, so then I was diagnosed with bulimia, and then I was sent to a counselor that, I think I went to see this counselor, didn't really work out with that one. And then I found a private counselor, and I spent a bit of time with her. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s I finally found a therapist I felt that I could open up with. And so that was huge. Then we began to unfold all of the difficulties, and talk about them. And when I was seeing this therapist, my mother developed cancer, and she had cancer for 2 years, and then she suddenly died. She got septicemia and died.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but I luckily was seeing this counselor, and I do believe now if I wasn't seeing that counselor, I wouldn't be here today because of the trauma of her passing. Um, and then when, I finally worked through all the difficulties, I decided that I wanted to be able to help other people how I'd been helped. So hence why I trained to be a therapist.
Hmm. And okay. So I'm kind of I'm aware that this is two therapists talking, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to just go for it and just have a conversation, a compassionate conversation from the perspective of our expertise, but I don't want to forget about the audience.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, and someone's going to click on this episode and they're going to listen. What might someone want to know most about this extraordinary turnaround, that is Kate today?
Mm.
And so I'm thinking, I'm intuiting, I'm kind of feeling that someone might really want to know.
Mm.
Do you remember, first of all, a moment at some point in your journey where you knew that something had to change?
Mm. I think I just got so desperately out of control with the bulimia because, I couldn't even eat an apple without that sending me into a binge. It was that severe. And
So sorry, can I just interrupt, just to kind of give context to us that haven't had bulimia, right? So when you say like impression I'm getting is like this out of control binge,
yeah.
like you can't just eat one apple, you eat like a kilo of apples. Is that what you mean? Is that kind of what would happen for you?
So I would starve myself throughout the
Mm-hmm.
day. And this was at one period I would starve myself,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I could binge in the evening, and then I would go to the shop on my way home from work and buy heavy loaded carbohydrate foods, sugary foods, all the foods that I would, never consider eating ever. And go home and then just binge on all that food and then make myself sick. And then, I remember there's times when I would, if I had a day off from work, I would go to the shop, buy the food, come home and do that pattern. And then after like an hour, I would have that need to be able to, I had to do it again. So then I would go back to the shops, buy more food, and then go home and do it again. It's a very common pattern for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I got to that point where I knew that I just couldn't continue this behavior. Um, it was just too much for me, my body.
Mm-hmm. Was this, now you mentioned that your mum,
Had approached
or
me.
my impression is that she knew that this wasn't quite right and had
Mm.
approached you, etc. Were there other people that were kind of as well that had noticed that this maybe wasn't?
Yeah, so at the time when I was in my early 20s, I lived in Chicago in the States for 5 years.
Oh wow,
Um,
okay.
and my cousin was a doctor who I lived with, and I was nannying for them. Um, and so she was a pediatrician. She was a medical doctor. And from my patterns of behavior, it was obvious what I was doing. But even she back then didn't know what to do. And she told my mother. And when my mother came over to visit and hadn't seen me for a year, she was just horrified at how I looked. I was so skinny, so slim, and
Uh-huh.
with this big balloon face. And she did approach me about it then, and I was in total denial. Didn't know what she was talking about. She was completely wrong. And then when I moved back to the UK, I lived with her for 3 months. And she tried to approach me then, and I got very angry with her. I think it was probably the only time, one of the only times we ever had a big argument, because I still was in total denial. And then when I was living in London, she came to visit one day and she approached me again about it. This was a number of years later, but it was all a big hush hush secret, not secret, but the family would all talk about me, like, Christmas.
Mm.
Difficult time, but they'd all, get together and I'd walk into a room and then they'd all stop talking. And so it was
Ah.
really difficult for the family because they didn't know what to do. But if somebody is
Mm.
listening and they have a loved one that has an eating disorder, what is really important is that you do keep approaching that loved one about their behavior, because you're gradually setting seeds for them to begin to open up and reach out for help. So even though when you approached your loved one, they may get, as I did, very defensive, that's okay. At least they know that, when they are ready, that they have you to go to, that you understand and that you want to
Mhm.
be able to help them. But you are
Mhm.
setting seeds for them in the future if they do, bat you away and not ready yet. But it's important that you hear that. And that's what happened with my mother. And then I eventually I got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I knew that I had to do something. There wasn't any specific something that happened. It was just me um thinking, oh my gosh, I will, even though I didn't want to. I will, suppose I'll have to do something here.
Mm.
Um
Okay. What I find really important from what you just said is very simply, I suppose it was me. So the point that I'm making is that the final decision with a life change,
mm,
whether it be a huge one or a little one, ultimately resides from within with the person. But what I'm also hearing is that, that kind of the planting seeds, the intention, the showing concern, showing compassion is also really important,
yeah,
because it sows that sort of intention. It puts something in the back of the mind that
yeah,
that there's concern from
yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. So okay. So then, because if the intention of this podcast is to um, understand that innate collaboration between mind, body, emotion, spirit within, and your story so far, as you express it, was a little bit void in that space of emotional body. Right,
Rather,
like you say, people were asking me about feelings and I didn't know what they were talking about, or something along those lines.
yeah.
Yeah. How, and I mean, and by the way, I think that's, it's, it expresses itself in this way where
Mm,
people can really get into, into some mental health and emotional health and physical illnesses. But it's quite typical of the modern day society, right?
mm,
To be quite immature in that emotional body space, right? Even
yeah,
in physical body sometimes. We just don't look after ourselves, and sometimes self-care is a dirty word or two, even
yeah,
today,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So then, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I imagine I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway. when or how did you come to understand that that part of you needed to come around, needed to come into your consciousness, needed some developing and some maturing, needed some work? Because I'm wondering how people, like anyone watching that's maybe thinking, oh, emotion, schmotion, whatever, right? And they're not realizing the impact that has on their life. How did you come to that awareness that, maybe you needed an emotional dictionary, or you needed to be able to connect with some of that, and B, how the emotions are connected with the mind?
I think it was with education when I found that fantastic therapist that she started to educate me about my feelings. Yeah, it's definitely her. And then I started to gradually unravel these feelings I had from past experiences. And she had me talk about them slowly, gradually, and open the door to the feelings. But it was with the help of her, with a therapist.
And so then, fast forward today, I would love it if you would share a little bit about what is your strategy? What are the ways in which you stay emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually healthy? What are the things that you do on the daily that help you stay, at your highest potential, perhaps?
I think that I've spent so much time working on myself, and particularly practicing NLP is focusing on, how you're going to take yourself forward and goal setting. And I'm a very motivated person. But I also practice mindfulness. I find daily, that, and I teach that as well. I find that really powerful. For people that don't know what mindfulness is, it's the awareness that arises by paying attention on purpose in the present moment and not being judgmental of yourself, that your mind does kind of race off here or race off there, and just kindly bring it back to the whatever it is that you're focusing on. It's such a hip word. It has been for a long time, but it's such a simple but powerful type of way of life that you can integrate into your life, that is so beneficial for your well-being. And they've done so much research since the early 2000s on mindfulness, haven't they? And the incredible brain changes they have, actually have evidence of how the brain changes positively to be able to help you. So I practice mindfulness, but I'm also very attuned to my feelings. And, in this day and age with the difficulties, and I do still get, negative thoughts and, and anxiety, but I have the tools to be able to deal with it, particularly, like I say, in the difficult times that we've been having, and how so many people now have developed anxiety over the last 2-3 years. And it's because, with the pandemic, or particularly in the UK, we were locked down for a period, and then the uncertainty and the worries and the fear of what was going to happen, and then the doors were open again, and then we were locked down again, and it was the unknown. So people felt very unsettled at that time, and now the doors are open. But then we've got this cost of living crisis, and then of course the war in Ukraine. That's all very So people are just constantly in fear of what of the future, which has increased people's anxieties. And so I'm very attuned to how I'm feeling and working with those feelings. And I think that's really important. If you're not feeling very happy or you've got some sort of difficult feeling, it's tuning into that feeling and talking to it. Okay, well, what do I need to do to be able to help to ease this particular feeling? And it's always the very first answer that comes into your head is the correct answer. It's that unconscious mind that's talking back to you, and working with that. Speaking out for yourself if you need to. Not agreeing and going with what everybody else always wants to do. You've got to tune into yourself and nurture yourself.
Do you know, I what I'm hearing you say so beautifully is there has to be that relationship with yourself.
Yes.
In order to tune into your feelings, you need to have a relationship with yourself. You've got to respect yourself enough to stop for a minute
Yeah.
and listen, right?
Yeah.
And I find that this part of, your message is maybe not in exact words, but the sentiment is repeated over and over and over again by so many wonderful people that are in service in some way, whether they're therapists or whether they're coaches or whatever it is, right? And so I really love that you talk about that because, for anyone listening to this and hearing this, maybe for the first time or maybe for the 10th time, Kate and I will probably both nod to the fact that when you stop for a minute, you might want to close your eyes. You might just want to take a deep breath and just check in with yourself. It costs you nothing. Like it's zero.
Yeah.
Doesn't affect the bank account. Doesn't it doesn't have any of those pressures associated with it. You don't have to go to a therapist, right? In order to stop for a minute and listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Although you and I are both therapists, so we say, get some help. You need it. But what I was asking you about was how do you support yourself these days? What are the things that you do? And so that's, you list that as one of the things that you do, which is amazing.
Another thing that I do, I use the emotional freedom technique, the tapping technique.
Yeah.
And
Explain that for those that don't know what that is. Yeah.
So it's tapping on a routine. So they call it the tapping therapy. It's tapping on a routine of points while thinking about any negative feeling that you have. Then you can reduce down that feeling. So it's like acupuncture, but without the needles. So once you've learnt the routine of points to tap on, then you can use it anytime, anywhere. And it's fantastic. It's brilliant because you don't even have to believe in it to be able to do it. And I teach it in my book, or both the books, The Anxiety Hacks and The Bulimia Sucks. And it's just so powerful because you've also got it there at your fingertips. And so if you have a difficult feeling, you can tap on the routine of points while tuning into that feeling, and you can reduce down the feeling. Brilliant. brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And I learnt this I think I trained in 2004 for it, and I just still use it. I teach it to all my clients because it's a great tool to be able to have in your pocket to be able to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what I'm also hearing you say is there are many different tools that a person can use,
Yeah.
right, to help themselves in their own environment.
Yes. And it's finding what works for you. So it's experimenting. People with anxiety, that's why my book is packed full of lots of different ways to help you with anxiety.
It
So because
actually is,
everybody's
yeah.
different. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
finding, what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
So why I think this is important, Kate, is because part of my intention for this podcast also, and I openly talk about this because I want awareness. I think awareness is really important. And part of my intention, right, is to begin to plant those seeds, like you were talking about before,
Yeah.
around a conditioning that when there's something wrong, we have to, only an external authority has answers for us. I'm trying to help people understand that we don't always have to give our power away to others, that we have lots of things that we can do
Yeah.
for ourselves to
Yeah.
make our life better, easier, more fun, more successful, more abundant, more expansive, more limitless, and so more loving, more unconditional. All of those really awesome things that everybody wishes for, right?
Yeah.
And so when you talk about this, including your book, Anxiety Hacks, which I have mostly read, I haven't read Bulimia Sucks, but I can speak for Anxiety Hacks and all the amazing hacks that you have listed, and the way it's written in that really amazing kind of easy to read, easy to
Yeah.
understand,
Good.
easy to digest ways.
Yeah. That was important for me, that
Mm-hmm.
it was very easy for people to read.
Mm-hmm.
And very straightforward, and I'm very direct, so it's very straight to the point, and this is how you do it.
Mm-hmm. So I will, of course, add the all the relevant. What am I trying to say? Sorry, I'm just having a total mind blank. All the relevant
So the
links.
links and
That's the
things, yeah.
word. Yeah. The links to your website and to your book and all of that. So that will be available if anybody wants to check it out. Please go ahead and do that. And just in summary, just a quick summary, going back to understanding, right, that your journey has brought you to this point, or
Yeah.
a point in your life where you felt you were ready and focused to make a change, to help other people. And so look at all this stuff that has come out of the strength and empowerment you arrived at through your healing journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm.
I absolutely congratulate you, and well
Thank
done, you. Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
well done. It's really quite amazing. So, um, uh, was there anything else you wanted to say about that, or can I just want to touch on one or two, maybe more things, and then we'll close up this podcast
Hmm.
because it's been such an amazing conversation. I want to leave it really kind of powerful. So is there anything else you wanted to add to what we just talked about, or
Um,
can I move on and ask you the next thing?
Well, I think what also happened through my journey is that from the age of 5, my brother always told me that I was stupid.
Mm.
And you know, and that was kind of like the family would look down on me and like, oh well, she's not very clever. But particularly my brother would tell me this. And then when I went to junior school, I remember being taken out for extra spelling and reading, like, you know, a few other kids, but we had to stand up in the class and be taken out. And so that was kind of started to reinforce, oh gosh, you know, maybe I'm not very clever. And then other things happened. And then when I went to boarding school, I was put in the bottom level of everything. And so that part of my mind had started to believe, oh, so she's being told at home that she's stupid. You know, this has happened, that's happened at school, and blah, blah, blah. So I will help her. My unconscious mind said, okay, well, this must be the direction that she wants to go in. So I'll help her to be like that. And so I started to truly believe that I was not clever. And that pattern continued. And then when I left school, I didn't do very well. And I with my exams, and I truly by that time believed that I would never achieve anything because I wasn't very clever. And then when I trained in psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, and the other therapies, that is when I learned about limiting beliefs. And that is when I learned that, oh my gosh, it's this is what's happened to me. So I've been kind of conditioned um in this certain way to think this way and believe from my thoughts that these because of these things that have happened that this was all true about me. But and the reason why I'm saying this is because I don't think it's talked about enough, but people don't realize that they have these thoughts that stop themselves from moving forward. Because there's lots of different limiting beliefs. So you could have a limiting belief that you maybe feel unlovable, or you have a limiting belief that you have to be in control about everything, or you have to be perfect at everything, and or you know that you are stupid like me. And so once I started to understand and realize this, then I started to take the steps to start to change the way I was thinking, because the long and the short of it is, yeah, these things had happened to me in the past, but it was only my thinking that was holding me back. And I had a choice whether I carried on thinking this way for the next, you know, 80 years, or whether I started to change this behavior. And it's something that you have to work and work and work on. Hence why I became an author, to prove to myself that I wasn't stupid.
Ah,
So to
wow.
yeah, so to continue confirming that, you know, to um, fight that those negative thoughts off. Even though I don't think that now, but it was, you know, it's still there slightly to like, right, you know, I'm going to prove to my brother
Mm.
because he still tries to do it now.
Good motivator, huh? I'll
Mm,
show you.
absolutely. So thanks to my brother, I wrote the first book.
I want to ask you something. Just I hadn't thought of this before, but I'm wondering now. Do you think that we are just as afraid of actually succeeding or having our dreams come true as we are of not having them come true or never amounting to anything?
I missed the first bit, it kind of cut out.
Okay, sorry. Um, do you think that we can be just as afraid of our dreams actually coming true?
Can we be just as afraid of them? Yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Because it's
So
the
we can,
unknown. People don't like
yeah.
change.
Mm,
Yeah, very much.
mm, yeah. I have found, to my surprise, that when I'm about to actually achieve something that used to be that was a dream of mine, that I had the tendency of then sabotaging it or
Yeah,
finding some sort of a problem in order to sabotage the process of actually achieving and getting what I actually wanted.
yes,
I mean, that's sometimes really obvious in like relationships or friendships or, things like that.
yes.
Or some sort of
absolutely.
financial success or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
there'll be reasons why, and it's
Mhm.
working with those difficulties of what's actually stopping you from wanting to move forward and do whatever it is, and unpacking that. And quite often, that is for me with my clients. That's when those limiting negative beliefs come forward. That negative thinking is kind of intercoiled into other areas of life,
Mm.
and so it's working with that. And working with what's stopping them specifically from, you know you know, whatever it is that they want to achieve.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised, I have to say, that this is the sentiment that's coming up in this conversation for me. I'm just observing sort of what's coming forward or to my awareness as we are talking. And this thing around, um, when I check in with myself, what myself, inner self, is talking to me about right now in
Yeah,
relation to this self sabotage is not so much that I don't think I'm worth it, but the language that I'm actually hearing, that's an echo of my past, coming from certain people in my past, is, who do you think you are to do better than the rest
mm,
of us?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
like this it's like an echo of an unconscious, like, tape that's playing in the back of my head,
yeah,
or used to play in the back of my head, right? That, well, it still plays at the back. The difference is now it doesn't influence me and I can just observe it. Whereas in the past, it would influence me unconsciously. It would still be playing in the background because it's part of my life journey, right?
yeah,
And it would influence the choices that I would make. That doesn't happen anymore, but it's really interesting that this is the echo that's coming forward, as a result of us having this conversation.
yeah,
And that's sort of maybe what kind of the process that you were talking about earlier. When there's something there, then you kind of stop and you kind of listen to yourself and go, oh, okay, what's this? What do I need to do with this, if
yeah,
anything?
yeah, absolutely. And awareness is the first step, acknowledging that thought and then
Mm,
starting to work with that. Um, and for a lot of people, they have so many negative thoughts that come into their mind that don't need to be there, these thoughts, but for a lot of people, they actually listen and believe what they tell themselves.
mm.
And majority of it isn't true.
So I want to ask you in closing, as the last question, right? So I've got it, as you're talking, I've got an image of this man sitting on the couch, listening to this conversation going, well, I have so many thoughts. How do I know where to start and which one's mine and which one's somebody else's? What would you say to something like that?
Um, I would say that first of all, okay, listen to the thoughts that you have, and what is it that you feel that you want to change, and how are those thoughts connected to that? And then I would, one really good technique to use to be able to begin to stop those thoughts that don't need to be there, that are holding you back, is to use the technique called thought stopping, which is so simple, but it's really powerful. So it's recognizing those negative thoughts and then shouting stop at them. If you're on your own, you shout out loud, but if you're with people, in your head, and then taking a nice deep breath, and then telling those thoughts to go away, however you would like to word that, to get lost. And then they will come back again. And then you're going to do it again. But slowly over time, the more that you do that, the more that thought will quieten down and stop.
Mm. It loses volume, doesn't it? It loses intensity.
Yes.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's really amazing. Okay, so just checking in. I actually want to leave the conversation with that amazing piece of advice that you just gave.
It's a great
That,
technique.
yeah, that people can adopt and practice and eventually embody. Embodying meaning that it becomes first nature, something that you just do as part of, who you are.
Yeah.
And I want to say I'm totally and absolutely and deeply honored that to hear your story, that you were willing to share that with us, because that's really vulnerable and it's really intimate, and it's such an honor to be present for, when people so honestly share their life journeys on a podcast. For goodness sake, I mean, seriously, if we could all just learn how to be better with, with this and with this,
Absolutely. Yeah. And realize there
Um,
is a connection between your mind and your body.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kate. I really, really appreciate you and your
Well, thank you,
work.
Deanna. What lovely, beautiful words. Thank you so much. Very
Of
kind of you.
course, it's my pleasure. And if there are any questions, please go ahead and share in the comments and we can get back to you. I will also replay this episode. So we will go live and then I will replay the episode. So people will get a chance to connect with this story on several occasions, and I hope that many go and check out your book, and I'm really happy to support that and go ahead and win in the best and highest good
Oh,
for
yes. It's
you
on
and your life
Amazon, so
journey.
anybody can find it. Anxiety Hack.
On Amazon. Now, is there anything else you want to share as far as your actual business is concerned, to say it out loud before we finish this podcast, this episode?
Well, I see clients face to face, but I also work online as well,
Mhm,
on Zoom or
mhm,
FaceTime or WhatsApp.
mhm.
And so the best way to get hold of me is either email me at katehudson4@gmail.com, or you could go to my website, which is katehudson-hall.com. And you can check out my books on there and me and information and whatever else you can find on there. And all my podcasts as well. The
Oh,
podcast,
right.
yeah. The
Mhm,
podcasts are on all the major platforms, so Bulimia Sucks or Anxiety Hacks. So just put them
mhm.
into wherever you listen to the podcast. Be able to find it there.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. All right, my darling. I'm going to say thank you again. And thank you to everybody that watches this episode. And Kate, don't go anywhere. I'm going to stop recording, but would you just stay in the studio for a moment longer, just so that we can finish up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I will be seeing you very soon with the next episode. Bye. Bye for now.